Great to see you all here today. I'm Jason Gurley with Air Miners. We've got a wonderful lineup today talking about digital MRV and inclusive and trustworthy sources of said digital MRV. We're doing this event today as part of our MRV series, knowing that how we measure, how we report, how we verify carbon removal credits are the crucial underpinning of that. The digital MRV space is a space that's growing and offers new and interesting pathways to achieve that way of making sure that we are removing the carbon that we aim to remove from the atmosphere, and that it is a way that's credible to others. On our mission in Air Miners to remove that first billion cumulative tons of carbon and its equivalent from the atmosphere by the end of 2030. So we're glad to have you with us on the journey. Deborah Graywolf on our Air Miners team is helping out with the event today. Hey, Deborah. And we have, in a minute, I'm going to leave it to Charlotte Levy, our moderator, to introduce the rest of the panel. For a run of show, we're going to do what we typically do, have about maybe 35, 40 minutes of discussion, followed by Q&A. If you ask your questions in the chat, we can, if we have time, we can ask for you to unmute yourself during the Q&A and ask the question yourself. Hopefully you can. And then at the tail end, after 60 minutes, we'll stop the recording and hang on for another 30 afterwards so that we can network amongst each other and get to know each other, not just know of each other, if that makes sense. So without any further delay, I just want to say thank you once again. And Charlotte, take it from here.
All right, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. And thank you so much to Air Miners for organizing this, but also to everybody in the audience for bringing us together today to talk about digital MRV. My name is Charlotte Levy. I work as a Senior Science and Innovation Advisor at Carbon 180. Our team designs and advocates for science-based equitable policies to remove carbon from the atmosphere at a gigaton scale. And as part of this mission, I've been involved in our work to outline those tools for measurement, reporting, and verification across various CDR solutions. So I couldn't be more thrilled to be digging in on these digital tools and innovations in the field with such an amazing crew of panelists. I'll start by passing the mic to each of them to do quick introductions. And I'll just say right here for everyone, we are lucky to have two people with very similar names on our panel today. So I'll be trying to make sure I say everything as clearly as possible. I'll start by passing the mic to Anna Lehner from Carbonfuture.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us here on the panel today. So my name is Anna. And my background is in chemistry and material science. And also I've spent some time in accelerating green startups before I joined Carbonfuture, where I take care of standards and methodology integration. So for us, dMRV is our product. As at Carbonfuture, we track and trade durable carbon removal credits. And we see this as a great tool and as a possibility to really increase trust. That is the absolute requirement to gain confidence, to unlock investments, and to help scale durable carbon removals to a climate relevant scale. So thanks.
Awesome. Can I pass it to you, Nicholas, next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me. I'm Nicholas Kee. I'm from Jamaica. My background is historically in tech and business. My introduction to the climate change space has been a more passive one in the form of side quests with respect to being involved in policy and some renewable energy work. And then 3 years ago, I started this ocean farm network called Kee Farms, where we basically focus on climate change mitigation through ocean regeneration and restoration.
All right, thank you. And last, I'll pass to Anna Lerner.
Thank you so much. The first time the other Anna emailed me, I was like, wait, I emailed myself? But there's slight differences to our names. We're also two European Annas, which makes it maybe even more confusing, maybe. Thank you for having me. This is really exciting. My day job is managing a climate tech community of startup and innovators some investors and some scientists through the Climate Collective. So really thrilled to get to join the air miner community here. I feel like maybe we could get our two communities together in some other shape or form one day. I've worked with really, really large platforms, financing climate, like the World Bank. Also done corporate sustainability through Meta, another really large private sector platform. I also worked many years in Sub-Saharan Africa, working with nonprofits and governments doing project implementation. So I've been for many years across the whole spectrum of carbon markets, carbon finance, and climate action, way before it was kind of cool. So I'm thrilled that we're having this conversation today. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you, all of you. To set the stage, I wonder if I could ask you to define digital MRV for us. How is this different from MRV as we've conventionally described it? And I'll start by passing to Anna Lehner. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, I mean, this community has seen a lot about MRV. It used to be called measuring. Now we say monitoring, reporting, and verification. And Anna probably knows all the way back to the days when it started in, in the UN, and she can tell us about that later. As I said, for Carbonfuture, dMRV is a product. It's part of what we do as an IT and sustainability company. And it is the practical translation of the physical activities to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it permanently into something that can be sold as a credit or it just can be aggregated into a certificate. And to make it digital is to me, it always makes sense to have digital and automation in the same word. So we don't just put it into computers or use more digital tools, but we really want to streamline the process and make it swifter and more scalable. And with those new tools, we could, and we will definitely look into the M, the R, and the V part in more detail. But to us, it's just when you have those new tools, it's interesting to also optimize the end product. So how can we shape those tools and integrate them to add more trust to the whole to this translation that we're doing, and how can we make it more inclusive? And that's what we're focusing on soon.
All right, thank you. I'll pass it to Nicholas next.
Yeah, so I guess the traditional MRV, as we probably already know, it has been historically a bit bureaucratic. Usually have to rely on a lot of parties and stakeholders in order to have like a certified credit of sorts. But as we move further towards, bridging the digital divide, we're finding that in our space specifically, we'll have a lot of automation included in our MRV processes. And so that is by way of the development of AI models, but more importantly, IoT instruments, or Internet of Things devices and equipments that are able to provide a lot of this data in real time so that we can make more accurate predictions and even just more accurate assessments of how we essentially make impact or quantify the impact that we're making.
Perfect, thank you. And last I'll pass to Anna Lerner.
Thank you. Well, there's not that much to add. I think these were two really great explanations. The two pieces I would maybe add would be, one, this is, just as Nicholas said, this is about taking advantage of the progress that the world has made in digital technology over the last couple of years. You remember like 10 years back when people were like, data is like the new gold, data is the new oil. I mean, that's real. And a lot of economies and a lot of companies have benefited greatly from that notion over the last couple of years. I think you all know them. And this is an opportunity for the climate, biodiversity, and environment space at large to start taking more advantage of these solutions, packaged under this concept of digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, which is so critical to the transparency and the quality of carbon markets and tracking climate impacts, mitigation outcomes, and greenhouse gas inventories under the Paris Agreement. So it's about leveraging these new digital technologies to move away from analog monitoring, reporting, and verification, which is costly and, as Nicholas pointed out, very complicated. And then the other piece I think also is important. It also helps us to keep track of what's going on in the world. So before it was quite excluding. You couldn't verify someone else's carbon claim or mitigation outcome claim. You kind of had to trust them. Today, those calculations don't have to sit in a black box. You can actually transparently share it using some of these superior models and technologies and analytics solutions. So to me, that's what makes it really impactful, that it actually enables all of us to have greater transparency and understanding in what's actually going on.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So just to move on from that, all three of you are at the cutting edge of developing and implementing this kind of digital MRV. All of you have mentioned some really interesting paths forward. I wonder if we could talk about what some of the trends that you're seeing in this field are. And maybe this time I'll start with you, Nicholas.
Yeah, sure. So I guess specifically within the ocean space, many of you probably are already familiar, but the ocean space is very much exploratory, and we're in the heavy R&D phase of any form of MRV related to carbon accounting. And so we haven't really had a secure methodology or protocol that is amenable to what we could not just produce as like a certifiable credit, but also put onto the carbon trading markets, because everything within the ocean is a bit more unpredictable. The trends that we're now, I guess, seeing, and even for us, even just like exploring for ourselves, is taking advantage of a lot of IoT development, a lot of IoT devices that we develop in-house, and even partner with other people to collect as much data as possible, to not just assess the I guess the growth rates of our biomass generally, because we grow seaweed and oysters, for instance. But we also, with those same devices, account for the amount of biodiversity that we add into the environment, and by extension, we can assess, based on water qualities and other variables, assess how much carbon we're able to just pull from the environment and by extension remove, to then along the value chain create different byproducts that can even lock in the carbon some more. And so the trends that we've been seeing are the implementation of more IoT devices, so that we can have this real-time data available, but also the development of more unique AI models that can accommodate the vast variable structures that essentially exist within the ocean, and I guess exist surrounding us living and making impact within the ocean. And I think the last frontier that we that is a small trend, but that we're trying to edge towards, is automation of the certification process. And so we've seen some emergence there that we're hoping to take advantage of. But funnily, one last thing, we have at least explored the idea of implementing blockchain tech more intentionally. Historically, it has been used for a lot of geotagging for different biodiversity species. But now I think we're at the stage where we're able to dig deeper into understanding how we can measure the impact and account and secure that impact on like a blockchain ledger, so that it can be visible to everyone, so that there can be transparency throughout the entire process.
Perfect, thank you. You've covered so many topics there. Thank you so much. Next, I'll pass to Anna Lerner. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a couple of trends that you asked for, I would say, and I was actually Googling Kee Farms at the same time, all the stuff that Nicholas talks about. I'm like, this is so relevant. This is so important. Some trends that I'm seeing, so a large group of the Climate Collective members are working on voluntary carbon markets, or like some compliance markets, digital MRV, but a lot of VCM, voluntary carbon market focus. So if I should think ahead and not looking at kind of what these innovators are presently pushing the boundaries are, which I would also say is quite innovative, but looking even beyond that, I'm seeing a lot of corporates making value chain sustainability pledges, like Amazon came out 2-3 days ago, Meta yesterday saying we're going to actively work with our supply chain partners to support them in their decarbonization and setting their own climate targets. So this is kind of carbon accounting in a sense, but it's across your value chain. How do you keep track of that? Well, I mean, you need digital MRV to make sure that it's transparent and that you actually know what your down or upstream value chain partners do. So I guess one big trend for digital MRV is kind of moving beyond what traditionally was focused on, you know, biodiversity and maybe carbon markets, to also look at ESG reporting and kind of scope 3 emission pledges and tracking of those across over years.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. And I love that we're covering such different parts of the space. And next, Anna Lehner, can I pass to you?
Yeah, thanks. I'll have to see if I have more trends that I can add to this, because it's already a lot. Maybe stepping back again to thinking about what is digital and how do we need to prepare the real world to put it into a computer. I mean, I'm not an IT science person, I'm a chemist, but this is how I think about it. We need some kind of drawers, and then we'll add information in it. And IT never likes strings or open text. So we have to categorize it. And that is really something that is very similar to what we do when we standardize. And once we have the rules behind how to parameterize, how to model the real world into something that is machine readable, we also have a joint concept of how to share the data between each other. So I think what a trend that I see in the space right now is also that we have some sort of unbundling of companies doing jobs that previously only one entity would do, but now we might have a standard. Under a standard, there will be a credit issuance body, there will be a registry operator, they could be a developer of methodologies, and those could be separate entities and not bundled into one. And that's something I think that really the digitization in a form of finding consent about what categories of data and what data flows we need to keep track of really brought in as well. So some sort of modulation also for methodology development. That's something we see with the CCS Plus initiative, where there is not a methodology for the whole removal pathway, but there will be building blocks that you can put together. We also see things around data pipelines, so that the project developer or supplier of CDR might not be the one handling the data at all. It makes it more fraud proof in a way to really have this pipeline that cannot be touched and manipulated. And yeah, having more open source code and more people to openly, transparently collaborate and also share methodologies or license them instead of just copy and pasting them is something that we see. And I'm getting pretty excited about that one.
Perfect, thank you. And I think those themes are ones we're going to keep coming back to, sort of the third party, verifying, transparency. So the next question I have is Anna Lerner. I know that you've had a lot of experience working with communities. You've done some work, you said, in Africa with communities there. So one of our themes today is the inclusiveness of MRV, where carbon removal projects often need to work closely with local communities to ensure that they come off to the best they can. How can digital MRV systems facilitate communication with those local stakeholders and incorporate their input during the verification process?
Yeah, this excites me a lot. I think the international development community has had a lot of rounds of community consultations and bottom-up programming design, and it let's just say it hasn't really kind of yielded the results that we've all hoped for. Two pieces of inclusivity that I'll try to touch upon. One is more opportunities for communities to participate and benefit from these type of projects that are happening sometimes within their community, sometimes in the vicinity of their community, and can create positive or negative, positive incentives or negative externalities on their livelihoods. And the other piece is more inclusive/justice perspective, who is captured within these solutions, and who has access to these technologies, I guess. So first one, so a lot of most entrepreneurs in the climate collective community are working on Web3 or blockchain in some shape or form. We call it digital technologies. They have AI embedded, or blockchain, or other kind of digital tech across their solutions. Several of them are really focused on community engagements and programs that drive some kind of almost like a resilience premium or a risk compensation, climate risk compensation to local communities. How do they do that practically? One group called Open Forest Protocol has a decentralized digital MRV solution where they invite communities to participate in systems like, they call it measure to earn, or other kind of programmatic structures where a community could contribute with collecting data, perhaps ground truth data for the monitoring part of the project by, if they have cell phones, or if they're provided cell phones, they can go and take pictures of the trees. Let's say if it's a tree planting project, reforestation project, and they can take pictures every 6 months or every other year to show the change in the landscape. And then you can use machine learning and computer vision to analyze that picture and use that as a piece of evidence, as a piece of dynamic data that goes into a digital MRV structure. And for this, they are compensated, and often directly compensated, versus sort of trying to create these superficial kind of new organizations and governance structures that might not be part of what their own culture kind of has put in place in the first place. So I think that's really neat. We also look at payments for ecosystem services as an opportunity, particularly using digital currencies that avoid a lot of the currency exchange transactions. So in Kenya, there's some groups that are incentivizing community members to plant trees. I think it's called Levy protocol. And they are using payments, they call it direct payments for ecosystem services, where we're essentially channeling compensation to these communities for protecting biodiversity or critical ecosystems. And I mean, this is kind of, we need to figure this out, right? Because we know that the local communities are actually best placed. They have the know-how, and they're the best placed at preserving biodiversity or protecting these ecosystems. It's just that they shouldn't do it for free. They shouldn't help us clean up our mess for free, right? So we need to find sustainable structures that we can actually compensate them for this. The other piece around kind of inclusivity and justice that is relevant is something that was made aware of fairly recently. There's another climate collective member called Planet Watch. I think they're based out of Italy. They're providing fairly relatively affordable air monitoring sensors. And they pointed out that, for example, Google Maps has this really interesting air quality filter as one of their filters. But if you look at where they have sensors deployed, it's largely United States, handful of them at most in Europe, and really like nothing in the rest of the world. So that brings me back to this justice perspective. Some of these technologies and some of these ways of tracking, if it's air quality or other things, should be universally available. So I think the opportunity with digital tech and software, we know you can do things cheaper and faster using these technologies. And I'm hopeful that that will help generate more local innovation. For example, bottom-up sensors. Nicholas talked about the challenge of doing blue ocean monitoring. We have the same situation for a lot of our soil carbon projects, where there isn't really affordable soil carbon sensors. So regenerative farmers in Brazil, working with Reseed, another climate collective member, are struggling to access these sensors so that they can prove that they're actually improving the carbon content in the soil, because the sensors are too expensive. So I think we have, these are early days. We have a lot we can do to make sure that digital MRV becomes kind of the vehicle to increase inclusivity and justice across climate.
Perfect, thank you. That was really covered a lot of ground, really comprehensive. Thank you so much. Nicholas, I know you also work with local communities. You're part of the local community, and then you're also in the position of being a small business owner who's planning to potentially sell carbon removal credits down the road. So I wonder if you could give some thoughts on how digital MRV systems enable greater transparency. We've heard a lot of conversation about enabling independent verification of removal, involving third-party organizations to build up that trust and impartiality. And I know you also have the tech expertise, so I wonder if you could take that one.
Yeah, I guess before the emergence of probably blockchain as like a mainstream conversation point, I think one of the things that we probably could have been doing back in the day is to really rely on digital systems that already have this legacy aspect ingrained in them. I know that we have a lot of verifiers on the table that we inherently rely on. However, if there was an opportunity to probably go back then and have different organizations like myself, if we were around, basically develop platforms to help just assess and even just collect and gather the data that would be around, to then produce and put into the form of a report or some kind of mechanism that can help to streamline a lot of the data to so some of the entities themselves that would have certainly helped. And this is the climate change space hasn't, I guess, caught up to the tech revolution. So instantly I can easily see a reality, or could have seen a reality where there could have been platforms or platform shells available to organizations that participate in carbon trading, to then plug into some of the verifiers like Gold Standard or even Vero into just like an API key so that they can assess all the data that is coming in and then distribute the rewards on the chain and back to the organizations themselves in the form of money, of course. Now, with more digital infrastructure in place and even with the emergence of blockchain tech within the mainstream conversation, we can do things like having the organizations themselves act as blockchain oracles. And so with that, we're able to just connect a lot of the external data that we don't have access to and just put it on, basically package it into something called a smart contract. It's just like, you can think of it like a package of data, and that can just be shared instantly with the verifiers themselves. And then the rewards can be streamlined down the chain back to the organizations, and even by extension to the entire network. And in our case, the network of fisherfolk and farmers that we essentially have and serve. So if you think about it, in, I guess, a cycle or a chain, we could have organizations like myself produce the data, produce this smart contract of sorts, or even like an API key to the verifiers themselves, like Gold Standard. And so they'll be able to not just send us the rewards in the form of money, but we could then further down the line send the rewards to the independent farmers and fisherfolk members within our network and community as a reward as well for making the kind of impact that we also trying to influence.
Perfect, thank you. I think you even managed to answer one of the questions in the chat while you were wrapping up. It was so smooth. Anna Lehner, I wonder if I can pass to you the next question. I know in your role you've considered many different types of CDR pathways. How does digital MRV address the specific challenges of those different CDR pathways?
Yeah, great question. So I would say that before we do digital MRV for new and emerging removal pathways, of course, we have to do MRV first, in a way of what I mean by that is setting the rules of what needs to be monitored and what frequency, and who needs to look at it, and what is the basis upon which we decide to issue a credit or not. But then going deeper into this monitoring plan and finding out exactly what are the data sources that are available and how can we access them with more sensors or maybe satellite data or whatever we have and we can think of with those cool innovative tools. It gets important to see again what are we accounting for in this while we translate the real world process. So for example, we had heard a lot about things already in the ocean space, soil carbon, enhanced weathering is another one that's relatively tough, right? Because you have an open system, you might be spreading finely ground silicate rock dust onto agricultural land, and then you want to know whether CO2 has been removed, and if so, how much over what time. So it needs a lot of shifts, not just to for each of those removal pathways define, well, what is even the pathway and where does it branch into another one? Because of course, the mineralization aspect of collecting CO2 by something that still is hungry for CO2, that is basic, or that is a silicate, or that could be a calcium oxide, is something that is similar to, from enhanced weathering of rocks to also carbonization of building materials. So the question is, where do we group those to even make rules, and what is a format that can be grouped to similar project types? And once we have clarity on that, I think it's really about deciding again what's important and what is not, what data sources do we need to gather, and then how can we translate or accelerate the process with digital tools. And a fundamental of this is also to think about who needs to handle or impact what kind of data along this data trail. So we should be asking from everyone involved in the value creation of a removal only the things that they know about, ideally. So for a project supplier, if they're maybe a small startup and they're a team of 4 people, they might not have someone who can familiarize them swiftly with all the requirements of a new methodology. So it would be ideal for them to just put in the data that they know about their removal technology, and not about the methodology, not about how the baseline is calculated or what the additionality requirements are. So that could be in the software. We just have a questionnaire instead of writing a PDD with multiple hundreds of pages. Sometimes also we hear those large language models could be writing PDDs. I think as soon as we hit a point where software could do that, we just need to toss out the PDDs, obviously, and make something very sleek and reduced to the content that we actually need to collect. So we have a program called Catalyst to try to support methodology development, to go over what parts of this scope in the physical world needs to be translated how into parameters that then can be measured and issued credits for. And I think the fundamentals that we there apply is always to have principles of improving trust by improving quality, really working together to keep the bar high, to have a lot of transparency, to innovate and use digital innovations where we can, and to also collaborate on this. So I'm always a fan of having a full consortia in those new dMRV pilot projects, of having a standard, a VVB, a project supplier, someone who can track, it could be like an MRV provider, and then someone who buys the credits together to really feel out where data handovers need to happen. And IT systems need to be integrated. I hope that was somewhat of an answer to your question.
That was terrific. No, that was really terrific. Thank you so much. I think you've really, hit it right on the head with how difficult it is to think about what we're measuring in these different pathways and different systems. All right, so I think we have one more planned question before we'll start taking some audience questions. So to wrap up, I think we'll go around one more time with digital MRV has the capacity to integrate with a broader ecosystem of climate tools and technologies. What are some innovative opportunities that you're most excited for when it comes to digital MRV? And maybe even especially keeping in mind, I think there's a lot of people in our audience who might be interested in creating some of these tools and technologies. So what's the wish list? Let's start with Anna Lerner.
Love sending out wish lists. What a treat. There's so many things. One thing that I find frustrating. So climate for me is like three things. It's a lot of things, super complex, super complicated, but like trying to simplify it in my head, I think of three things. I think of money, like finance. I think of incentives for like doing the right things, like reducing, removing, changing, whatever it is. And then I think of trust. We need to trust each other. Like if I think that no one else is doing anything, why would I care? There's a lot of talk of blockchain, both here, but also in the chat. And I'll try to provide a little bit of more context and some good resources for those good questions that I saw in there. But for me, blockchain is kind of it's a distributed information ledger that increases transparency and can allow for accountability. So what if conference of parties meet once a year, all the countries come in with their own climate pledges of what they're going to do until next year. Fast forward a year, they come back and they're like, yeah, I did everything I said. And we're like, okay, great. Next, that doesn't work anymore, right? We have tech and we have solutions that can allow us to actually track this transparently. And you can say that about, nation states tracking kind of the global total mitigation outcomes of the world, or just like in a community or in a company or companies across companies. So one thing I would love to see is useful digital MRV technologies or solutions that can help us just get a more clear view of where we are as a world in our decarbonization journey, as well as structures that can increase accountability for that. There's some really incredible innovations. Carbonfuture is doing fantastic work. I'm super excited about what they're doing. And many with them are doing really interesting work for the voluntary carbon market, but the VCM is small compared to like the actual problem we're trying to deal with and like the trillions of dollars we need every year for energy transition. So if we can leverage digital MRV, we're putting a lot on this poor concept, but like if we can leverage digital MRV to help us get a better sense for that, that would be really impactful. That would probably also lead to more international or intergovernmental action. It could spur companies to maybe make good a little faster on their net zero pledges. It can help individuals to also kind of course correct and know what's going on in our community. So it's a tall ask, tall order, but I'd love to see something like that come out in the coming years.
I didn't come off mute as promptly as I thought I would. Terrific. Thank you so much. And next I'll pass to Anna Lehner to answer the same question.
All right. So, what sort of opportunities that I'm most excited about? As really, I'm not at the edge of the newest IT that ever has been developed. It's just not in my sphere of consciousness. And I feel more and more that as we have those new tools, we have to go back to the rules and we have to go back, as Anna says, to the incentives. So I'm really excited about having people who are experienced with designing rules of the game to really create incentive to improve the quality and not lower it, because often typically in capitalism everyone wants to do less and earn more for it, and we have to do exactly the opposite path here. So how can we build incentive structures and build consent about whether a credit is good or not, whether it should be passing the validation step for a product or the verification step and really get issued as a credit, but also then adding more dimension to this, not just the binary credit or no credit, but really more categories of what value means, and conceiving, rules around those roles and responsibilities that can incentivize everyone to really give their best and do what they can best do to create something trustworthy and high quality in the end. And then what I'm also thinking about a lot is really this shift of the accounting base of that. Of course, previously we had to look at projects and someone came in as the project proponent to describe it. And then we could decide if that's valuable, if it qualifies under this methodology. And if it does, then it can go into execution. And while it's operational, eventually can issue certificates could sold as credits. But now if we can track each packaging unit of, say, biochar to be sequestered into concrete, then the unique removal is actually the value creation chain of exactly the sink. And it's different from the sink that's been created from the same biochar that goes into soil application. We have more information, so it is discrete from each other, and we should also be tracking that and translating that into a credit. And the buyer of the credit then can have the look through of seeing where the fractions of the ton that they purchase in one credit really go to, and what the chain of ownership was. And I think that creates, great opportunities to have more liability around it and more accountability and more of this shared responsibility that we all need.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that you'd be able to track it like a commodity instead of just a project. Nicholas, I wonder if you could wrap up on this topic, and we'll be taking questions in chat. So after this, we'll be moving on to more audience questions.
I'm surprisingly I'm not even excited about blockchain anymore. I think that it has been established, and the technology at its core has been in existence for a while. But I'm more excited about the IoT space with respect to us being able to understand the true ramifications, or at least collect the data to understand the true ramifications of our general actions towards being able to better predict how each individual initiative that we just spur up can influence the climate change space generally. So from, doing things like growing seaweed, or even just, developing biochar to help with soil remediation, and even just locking in carbon, we are beyond that able to assess how biodiversity is impacted, so that we can get a better read of how we can, quantify, beyond quantify, but monetize, or at least look at each variable or each action, and be able to monetize or put a dollar value to our individual actions, so that we can have a better assessment of the true value of Earth, so that it can be more fact-based as opposed to just being based on wild assumptions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. As we move on, Jason, did you want me to pull specific questions from chat, or?
I think Linda has her hand raised. So let's go with Linda, and then Angela Madsen had a question. Then we can go to Edward Sanders. So Linda.
Hi, everyone. Linda Hofflander. I'm with Carba. We do natural biomass waste. We pyrolyze it, and then we bury it deep for permanent removal. So my guess is most everybody on the phone is either in startup or scale up stage. And I love the digital MRV. The problem that I have is that there's a missing link, and I need someone to help me fill this link. And it happens when I fill out RFPs. It happens when I fill out grants. I love that there's tracking going on, but everybody wants third-party MRV, like who's your third-party MRV? And it's not about tracking the data, it's who's actually measuring it and like doing it. And I know you're saying we've got to get to the rules and doing all of this, but it's like, if it's satellite or if it's RFID and it's being buried down in there, and the frequency, at some point, I mean, in order to sell, we're being asked all these questions. So I love that we have the platforms to track all the data, but what partners are you already linked with who have like a solution that they say, we can be your MRV, like, tracker, fix, like everything. If we're too small to actually come up with our own solution, that we can do an API to link with your software platform. Thanks.
Perfect. Would anyone like to take that first?
I would like to, because I think, it's definitely, there is a gap that you see and that you have, and I'm very grateful for you expressing it so clearly, that you need someone on the ground in the physical world with you to help gather data and send it to where it needs to be sent. I think the only strategy that we have at Carbonfuture so far is that we do really simple things. We try to start with something that is easily translatable. We start with like a lot of the vast majority of the credits we trade are really biochar carbon removals, as we believe that once we have this extended graphitic-like aromatic structure in the biochar, that it just nothing much can happen to it anymore. So we don't have to monitor it constantly. And I think it's really the key is starting with relatively simple removal pathways. And I'm sure that we will have better ideas about enhanced weathering and about ocean-based open systems. But it's for now, I would say let's try to start with the easy stuff. But yeah, I agree. We need more people to help. Definitely.
Yeah, it's a follow-up question. Sorry, Jason. Thank you. It's like biochar is easy. That's a soil amendment. That's kind of a different solution than permanent carbon dioxide removal that's going to be gone for thousands of years. It's being tilled in 6 inches or sprinkled on top. So testing on that's way easier. And I could call someone if I was doing something like that. But if you're burying something down, 4 stories or 3 stories or whatnot, like who's doing the solutions that can track that kind of permanent removal? Because to have a platform to track the data, I love. I just am having a hard time figuring out, because as you talked about, registries kind of like focusing on certification, and then somebody else is doing marketplace and somebody else is going to do MRV. I can't find true MRV anymore that actually has a solution outside of theory. But in order for us to sell, we have to tell people who's doing our MRV. When we say it's us, it's not good enough. And so they want to know who that is that's going to do that. So that's a challenge.
I think it's a great question that you raise of this defining the third party and who is the third and the fourth and the fifth and this is really important. And I think if we're at the stage where there is only one entity to be able to monitor data, and that's you because you invented it, then it will be you, and that's fine. And we'll improve from there. That's my take. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. This is such a good discussion. Thank you, Linda. Good to see you. I think next we had Angela Madsen. Is that right, Jason?
Yes. And then Edward Sant.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. So, and actually my question was the environmental footprint of blockchain. And Anna Lerner, you started to answer that, and I know that you went into the qualities of blockchain and why it's so important. So I would just love to make sure that everybody understands that what blockchain we use is really important.
Yes. I dropped a bunch of resources and examples in there, and it's a really good question. I think the looking at the environmental footprint of the blockchain is really important when you consider using blockchain or distributed ledger of any type. But then I also think if it would be me, I would also reach out to people maybe like myself or other people who are have a bit of a neutral kind of overview of the market and say, here is the business need that I'm trying to solve with blockchain. Which chain is useful? Which chain is good at doing this? Because we have lots of different chains that are specialized in different parts. Like Filecoin, for example, is a wonderful data management and processing chain, but maybe isn't the best for financial transactions. Ripple is another one that's pretty good for large institutional financial transactions. Cello, which is one that most of our members work on, is much more kind of decentralized and focused on emerging market access. So it's a mobile first solution where they are trying to support and provide technology for Latin America or African entrepreneurs. So all of these blockchains kind of have different features and capabilities. So I would just take a moment and think about what is it that I want to achieve with this, and which one of these ecosystems would be most kind of conducive and supportive. And then also, as an insider, most of these blockchains also offer some type of incentive, almost like a business development incentive. So I would reach out to their foundations when you figure out which one you like and be like, hey, I'm considering deploying on your chain or another chain. Are there any grants that I could access, or is there any way you could help us with deployment somehow? So.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for dropping those things. Nicholas, did you want to add anything, since I know you also have some expertise in this space? I just want to give you the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, with respect to blockchain, you kind of need to just, I guess, understand and do your due diligence on recognizing the type of consensus mechanism that the specific blockchain is using. And so that would determine, I guess, how energy intensive it is, or I guess by extension, what kind of means of getting to the, I guess, solving said equation, how they get to that endpoint. I'm a bit, I have a more nuanced purview of, I guess, one of the consensus mechanisms that is usually scrutinized and is used by Bitcoin specifically, which is more, I guess, energy intensive. If used right, or if used within certain parameters, it is probably the most secure form of blockchain consensus mechanism that we actually have. And so there is a whole other discussion that I'd probably go into, but to be safe, at least right now, the other more amenable consensus mechanisms that we usually have that are more carbon friendly within the mainstream media, they tend to use a lot of parties to reach the said consensus, and so it is more seen in a more democratized way, which is fine, and which is what works for our context right now. And I think we should definitely move forward in that direction as we figure out a lot of the kinks with the other consensus protocols.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So our next audience question is coming from Edward Sanders of Aquatic.
Thank you. I wondered perhaps if we could ask a general question about when we will move on from the use of pathways and whether or not digital MRV may be the thing that finally kicks it out the door. Open to hear thoughts from the panelists.
And Lehner, I saw you smile at that. Can I pass that question to you?
Yeah, sure. But I'll have to ask a question again can you please define of what you mean by moving away from pathways, or what pathway is to you?
Well, I think I know you were discussing, for instance, how rock weathering interacts with other pathways, and we sort of trip over ourselves because we forget. For instance, terrestrial DAC obviously has ocean degassing, so it's not a closed loop. And so we end up trying to define pathways when really we should be going down the MRV by a technology or a solution level. And my hope is that digital MRV does that. And so you can actually get to the root of it rather than using labels and proxies and sort of pathways as a catch-all. Yeah. Instead, let's just measure the thing that we actually care about.
No, this is a great question. And this is something I'm searching for. What is the right system size that we should be focusing on? There are some benefits of using CDR project types or pathways, of course, because we can form a scientific advisory board for enhanced rock weathering. And it can have all the people who are really dedicating their lives to that. And there is a benefit of having this. And if we go down to, if we lose the concept, I think, of pathways, then we would also maybe lose this aggregation to just get communities formed. If we just have people who are talking about molecules, like these people talk about carbonates, or these people talk about something that's more like elemental carbon. And it dissolves into these small technical steps, then I think the danger is if it gets too granular, we don't have the overview. We couldn't say in a CDR.FYI, we can sort this column by biochar, BECCS, enhanced weathering, to also get a feeling of where we stand. So I think it's an interesting balance. I see it moving into more fine granular topics definitely for when we are accounting and when we're issuing individual credits. So on the certificate level, I think we should be thinking about really what you say, the technical steps and having an end-to-end look through of what actually happened in the real world. But just to get to defining rules, I think we still might need the communities around pathways for a while, in some sort. They will change though. Yeah.
Also, just to add on to that, because it's very interesting. And I think we always, like, as humans, we like to classify and sort. I mean, like, you know, drawers and buttons or posted stamps, whatever it is, but we like that process. So but one thing we're about to release a paper, I think tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow, with RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, where we really talk about one of the biggest challenges with the voluntary carbon market in that it's relying too much on process integrity versus actual data integrity. And there's a lot of historical reasons for that, and we'll dive into the paper. Would love to hear all your feedback. But it goes back to your point, Edward, that we didn't have the data or the analytics capabilities to actually truly know what was going on in a dynamic way, in more real time, more granular, when these instruments were created. And that's why you created these simplifications, pathways, or kind of groupings of nature versus technology. And then it was like, oh, well, removals versus, you know. So I'm hopeful that in the coming 5-10 years, as these technologies will mature and we will start using them, the governance and the infrastructure of these markets will have stronger data integrity, which will allow for less simplification, particularly when we come to like the marketplace. I agree with Anna that the science part and the advisory structures are really important, and that is somewhat simplified by these pathways. So, good question.
Okay, thank you. This is such an interesting discussion. I think, it's always a question, how narrow or broad can we make these protocols? I think we have time for one last one, and we have Andrew Dixon up next, if you're willing to come off mute.
Yeah, well, I'll have to make the answers quick since we're have about 2 minutes left until the top of the hour.
I wanted to ask, insofar as inferring much ocean CDR likely requires the validation of and confidence in numerical models, biochemical models, how might this fit in to what you're talking about as digital MRV?
Perfect question. Nicholas, you're our ocean expert. Would you mind taking that one?
If you wouldn't mind just repeating the question again. I'd miss a phrase or two.
Yeah,
ocean CDR likely requires validation of and confidence in numerical biogeochemical models. How, therefore, would this fit into the concept of digital MRV?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I guess it kind of goes back to what I had been mentioning closer to the beginning of our chat, with respect to relying heavily on IoT devices and equipment that can provide all of this real-time data for us to then analyze on the back end, to then produce in the form of reports and to then send out to different entities. Right now, there isn't like, I guess, there isn't like a general consensus or like a third party that we can fully verify, use as a verifier to get in front of some of the buyers. And so a lot of it is doing the early work in order to get in front of some of the volunteer markets players, for instance, to ensure a lot of confidence, and also just bringing and collaborating with others within the Ocean CDR network, who also believe in digital MRV practices to get the entire movement going.
Perfect. All right, thank you. I know we hit 1 o'clock. Jason, I want to give you time to wrap up.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Charlotte, for your excellent moderating skills. Thank you to Anna and Nicholas for taking your time as panelists. Thank you to our audience, most of all, for such excellent questions and your attention. Again, we can't do this without you all. Shared a bunch of links in the chat. One is for, hey, our post-event survey. We want to learn how we can do better. Any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, we want to learn it so that we can provide the best content, the best experience to you, our audience. Also added the panelist emails because I know we didn't get to all the questions that I'm sure you all have. So feel free to email afterwards. Also, some upcoming Air Miners items. One is Launchpad applications are due on August 11th, August 11th, August 11th. The 11th of August is when the Launchpad applications are due for our accelerator program, 6 weeks with our AirMiners team on a variety of topics relevant to getting your early stage carbon removal startup off the ground. Also, next events are on August 1st, our FAQ event about the Kiloton Fund, which we just launched 2 weeks ago. So if you have questions, comments, or concerns about that, feel free to sign up, and we will have an open session with Tito and me and our AirMiners team to answer your questions about the Kiloton Fund. Finally, our next public event, panel event, is going to be on August 9th, with sponsored by Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati, about the latest Commodities Future Trading and Futures Trading Commission public convening on, hey, how carbon markets work. That happened last week. We'll have a partner from Wilson Sonsini online to impart insights and answer your questions about what that CFTC carbon markets convening means for us in carbon removal. So with that, we are 2 minutes after the hour, so I appreciate your bearing with us as we wrap things up. Thank you again, and thanks especially to Deborah Graywolf for her behind the scenes work to make this event operationally workable. And thanks again, we will see you soon.